Next to the GTI, the competition were like diesel locomotives. Fragile, noisy, uncomfortable and rusty, the GTI was the undisputed leader of the pack.
There were two really great things about the GTI. First, it could dance rings around cars that cost 10 times as much. And secondly, it flattered you. It made you think you were a good driver. Changing gear was like spooning honey. The seats just hugged you like a lover. The steering was a delight and it went round corners like a banshee on a skateboard. In the 80s, I drove little else. I had 6 Mark 1s in a row and loved them to bits. And then getting back into one 10 years later, you can see why they were just so remarkable. They really were the next best thing to Michelle Pfeiffer.
Suddenly, the GTI was the happening car of the 80s. Thrusting and quick-witted, it became an achiever's car, the ideal accessory for a decade obsessed with design, style and assertiveness. She told us to work hard, while she told us to pose hard. The GTI did both. Even the Americans, who usually preferred their cars the size of supertankers, wrote an open letter to Volkswagen begging them to sell GTIs in the States. Give Americans a reason, they implored, to leave their Porsches at home. But other car makers were chewing at VW's coattails. In 1980, Ford, impressed by the GTI's success, came up with a clone of their own, the XR3.
I think Ford definitely did copy the GTI concept with the XR3. They would probably admit it if they weren't, talking publicly. It was a very good idea. They could see the way the market responded to it, and they went at it as hard as they could go. The XR3 duly became the top-selling GTI car in Britain.
Even without fuel injection, the XR3 was turning heads, but the GTI seemed to be turning too many. It was a victim of its own success. If you couldn't afford one, you simply helped yourself. Those 3 emotive letters had become a liability. GTI now stood for Guaranteed Theft Item. From juveniles and joyriders to captains and colonels, the GTI's appeal was universal. Middle-class professionals admired its intelligent design and almost military precision. On a barracks in North London, we found 3, each fiercely admired by every age, sex and rank.
When I first drove the car, the acceleration was quite phenomenal compared to my previous Ford Escort, and I loved it. It's absolutely amazing, and also the top speed as well is quite high. But then I sort of thought about the car's engine and keeping it nice and changing the oil every 3,000 miles and all the rest of it. So I drive it around at a rather more sedate pace these days.
It was very fashionable amongst the military in the early 80s to have a Golf GTI, and any sort of guards mess you walked into had a line of black Golf GTIs lined up outside. I think they were popular because they had a bit of an image. They were the sort of first hot hatchback, they were sleek, they were nippy, and they were just a go-faster car.
My wife, whose car it actually is, I suppose, in theory, is very keen on the appearance, and I like that too, but the performance is its main claim to fame. Always was, and it had terrific reviews, as you know. And it's lived up to all of the expectations I had, even to the brakes, which are, as you know, distinctly iffy.
I've had about 9 GTIs so far, and most of them have gone to family, so my brothers have ended up with them. One brother's got 1, the other brother's got 2. My brother-in-law's got 1, his girlfriend's got 1, my wife's got 1, I've got 1.
And here's a small selection from the family fleet. Peter's obsession means that ownership is almost compulsory amongst his nearest and dearest. They all agree it's a fine car, but it's one that can rule your life.
Probably the chief drawback of the car is they're such fun that you really do get hooked on them, and the enthusiasm just takes off. And so when Pete and I get together, we just tend to end up talking about nothing else.
But if you think that's obsessive behaviour, you haven't heard the half of it. Modifying Mark I GTIs has become a street cult. You name it, they change it. But why gild a lily that doesn't need gilding?
I think really it's down to a basic sadness in my makeup. Initially, I bought my Mark I Golf GTI as a cheap, durable, quick car, just to get my boy a race out of my system. Unfortunately, I fell in love with a car and what it could do, and I wanted more.
It has its own individuality. There are, even with, say, XR3s or such other vehicles, they just don't have the individuality.
Because I like to improve the car in every aspect, and it just looks so much better and handles better. When you lower it, make it go faster, stop better.
The Mark I GTI is the original and best of all the hot hatchbacks, and I just try to make something that's already the best better.
But some reckon that the best should not be bettered, that the original GTI in its purest form is an emergent classic.
This car is a classic car. 3 reasons. Classic Car Magazine listed as an insurable classic. I have insured it as a classic because it's over 10 years old, and they are now becoming very hard to get, and people come up to me in the street and say, will you sell it? That is a classic car.
To their credit, Volkswagen never lost sight of what made the GTI great. They spent a whole hill of money making the Mark II more refined, but managed to keep most of its personality and panache. And the latest City Slick Mark III might ooze modernity, but it can still trace its bloodline all the way back to that matchless Mark I of '76.
The Mark I Golf GTI was the first cheap performance car that you did not have to suffer to own, and that is why it started a trend which endures today, and it will endure for another 20 years. I don't see why not.
The GTI revolutionized the way we think about little cars. It was the first, the finest and the most widely imitated small, fast car in the world. It gave high-tech handling and budget performance to millions of motorists. It might not have wire wheels or leather seats, be low, snorty or multi-carburetted, but it's a real classic in the truest sense of the word. You didn't really think we were going to drop it, did you? If only all cars were as enduring as a GTI.